Hey there, men. Recently put out an episode on civil unrest rioting. It was a recast, but I thought, with the stuff going on that I recently became aware of in France, Europe, with the rioting and civil unrest, and who knows what the next powder keg moment will be here in the U.S., or what city it'll be in, or where it will spread. Don't fall into that "it'll never happen to me" or "it'll never happen here" fallacy. Refuse to be a victim of that. In lieu of that, I thought today, consecutively from yesterday, I'd put out the part 2, as it's topical and maybe on more people's minds, and I'm here to serve you guys, so hopefully you find this message beneficial. What is going on, alpha males? Welcome back to the Alpha Male Podcast. Today, we're going to pick up in our civil unrest series. Today is going to be on bugging in versus bugging out and disaster planning. Before we get into today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review. If you want to support, please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and checking us out on Patreon, clicking on the Patreon link. I want you to do that because you think the content is worth something, that it's a ministry worth supporting, but you also get some cool insider content there as well. I'm going to plug in the normal bio, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about some specific experience and troubled times God's gotten me through in regards to civil unrest. If you want to skip the regular bio, skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds from where it starts, and we'll get into the bio and then the topic. Who am I? First and foremost, I am a servant of God and a follower of Jesus Christ. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter
government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT special response team in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic.
So a little bit about the things I've seen in life as it pertains to civil unrest and rioting. So I joined the Marine Corps at 17, and that was way back in 2001. This was before we went to war. This was pre-9/11. And I was in Kuwait waiting to cross the line, waiting to cross the border into Iraq. We had not yet invaded Iraq. We had not yet declared war. But we knew it was coming. We were sitting in our tents on the Kuwait border of Iraq. I had obviously already been through boot camp and basic training. And to my unit, we had shipped out. We all knew war was on the horizon, but we didn't know exactly when. And I don't have a way to prove this, and I'm not going to go back and try and substantiate it now, but we were told, and I have no reason to doubt, that we were, if not the first unit, one of the very first units to cross the border into Iraq. And I was infantry, and I saw things that only a Marine Corps infantryman in war would see. I got to see some unbelievably awesome and horrible things. One thing I got to see was I was in Baghdad, and I was a specialized infantry, and I was attached to, let's just call it, a very special unit. And we were in Baghdad covertly before we destroyed it. So I got the very, let's say, unique perspective. I was blessed to see Baghdad as a functioning major metropolitan city, much as you would see in New York or LA or London or Tokyo. Now, culturally, those places are very different, but they all have things in common, and they are a functioning society and culture in a large metropolitan area. They had electricity, they had running water, they had culture. The neighbors in our safe house, next to our safe house, were British. From what I understand, there was a pretty well thriving Christian community and Jewish community before we went in there. It was a large metropolitan city. It was a big, big city with a large population. I just looked up, and this is one source, but it says the population was over 5 million in Baghdad pre-invasion. And I got to see that city as the units came in, as we invaded it, as we bombed it. I got to see beautiful marble floors destroyed under several tons of tank and war machine. I got to see a functioning society with happy people walking down the street and kids playing. To packs of ruling factions, call them what you want, tribes, radical Islamic extremists, fighting in the street, shooting in the street. A society where once cops and police cars meant order, to having no idea what side they were on, whether they brought peace or chaos. The sound of gunfire in the streets and buildings literally being bombed and crumbling. The loss of utilities, the loss of things like power and clean running water. And sadly, fields of bodies just laying there in the sun. And it didn't take very long. I got to see that perspective that most other soldiers and Marines that came after me did not get to see, because it was always a war-torn place when they came. They had never seen it as it was before, much like any modern city in America and Europe would be. They didn't get to see it descend. They didn't get to see the breakdown. How quick it was, how violent it was, how unpredictable it was for the people that lived there. But I'm blessed that God got me through that safely, and that I can share that with you today. And then we can talk about it and learn from it and glean from it. And that you hopefully never have to see anything that horrible. Also, went to work for LAPD. And as you might imagine, we had our share of rioting and protests. And I would call them more, especially after the Iraq incidents, especially after the war, I would call them more of civil disobedience and protests. But there's some violence, yes. We obviously trained for civil unrest and rioting. We obviously got deployed to civil unrest and what I would call more not so peaceful protests. Also dealt with this both in training and getting ready for when I was a private contractor. And I was the commander of a tactical team when the large metropolitan area we protected got shut down for COVID. And I got to see on American soil just a light sprinkling of civil unrest and got to see quite a high spike in violent crime during that time. People getting desperate, people protesting because of things going on in other cities. In Minneapolis, which is not where I was, which is quite a far ways away, there was some, let's just call it racial tension. And some of the people that served under me, in fact, one of the members that served me on that tactical team, one of their family members was killed in let's call it a protest gone wrong with police. One of the family members of one of the men was killed, shot and killed. I got to see quite a bit of violence here on American soil. And again, it's alarming how quickly a city can change. Normal every day to chaos. So there's a few things that God has gotten me through. And with that experience, I'd like to share with you some lessons learned, some things that we can learn. Some of those lessons involve bugging in and bugging out. No, I have done both. If you listened recently, you know that I did a bug out actual. You can listen to that episode if you want, but I actually had to bug out. I hope that you guys listening don't ever face disaster or civil unrest or any kind of large-scale chaos. But I don't think I have to convince anybody listening that the likelihoods of that in recent years have gone up drastically. I don't think anybody listening with a rational mind would think that the world is becoming a safer, more secure, less chaotic place for a myriad of reasons. Number one, people turning away from God and doing whatever they want. Sin. People knowing what God wants them to do, but them doing whatever they want to do. That manifests itself in all manner of ways. Political strife, socioeconomic struggle, crashing economies, supply chain disruptions, shortages, famine, and war. Whatever the case may be, there are times for bugging in and bugging out. What I want to stress to you is that you don't just pick one. You don't just pick bugging in versus bugging out. It's situational. It's not like, oh, when the peanut butter and chocolate hits the fan, I'm just going to bug in or I'm just going to bug out. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. You have to plan for both. Now, as I said, I just bugged out. We just lived through the tunnel fire here. Now, I don't know anybody that would be able to tell the exact amount, but several sources I saw said 20,000 acres burned. And more than one quote that I saw said 109 structures burned. Now, not all of those were houses. Some of those were barns and stables and things. But there were definitely a few houses that burned down. Now, what if those families had said, you know what, kids, gather around. Our plan is to bug in. We're just going to bug in and hunker down. Well, they'd have burned to death. That's what would have happened if they were like, oh yeah, we're just a straight bug in. Our plan is just to always bug in. They probably would have changed their mind when they found it hard to breathe. If they would have been able to get out then, maybe it would have been too late. That's a real world example that by God's grace, he just got us through. We bugged out. Like again, what if those families had just been like, you know what, kids, all our stuff's here, we're just going to bug in. It wouldn't have turned out so hot. What about if you live next to a nuclear power plant and that nuclear power plant starts to melt down and there's a giant cloud of fallout coming just towards you and you can leave the area and avoid it before it ever gets there. Got a couple of hours warning. Are you just like, oh, we're always bugging in. That's our plan. We bug in. And you're just going to live in a Chernobyl fallout zone for the next couple thousand years? And those are very clear examples. You can't always bug in and you can't always bug out. On the flip side, what if there is a large-scale nuclear war and you're, let's say, on the East Coast, the Northeast, and pretty much every major city has been nuked and there's nuclear fallout everywhere? Well, we did a whole show on nuclear radiation. Your best bet then is to bug in. You don't want to be outside in the fallout. If you can stay bugged in for a couple of weeks, it greatly reduces the amount of fallout that you're going to be exposed to. So bugging in, you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to bug out. You can't always bug out. You're going to bug out into a forest with your bug out bag covered in nuclear fallout. You can't eat anything out there and you can't drink any water out there or anything like that. So it's one of the things that irks me about the prepper community. Like, oh, I'm always going to do this or I'm always going to do that. Well, I'd say then you're a poor survivor. The number one goal of survivalism, being a survivalist, is to survive. And if one of those options greatly increases your chances of survival, then that's the best option. And it's different, situationally dependent. What if there's an invading army pushing through whatever territory you're in with platoon elements of men, heavily armed, going house to house, raiding? You know they're coming. You know it days in advance. They're slowly marching from city to city, town to town. You're just going to stay in your house and stand on your roof of the AR-15? What do you think's going to happen to your family and your loved ones? They come there and they take you out and do who knows what with your family and plunder your goods. You think that can't happen? Well, it did happen. It happened right here in America. You think that the Northern Union Army was always good and just and doing the right thing? Look into Sherman's March and the Northern aggression and what they did to homes and communities and cities in the South. So it has already happened here before. So it's situational, and some places are much better to bug in than others. Let's say, let me pick like the worst place. Let's say you live in downtown Manhattan and you have time. You're much more likely in most common scenarios to want to bug out. If you live in rural Julietta, Idaho, which is a beautiful little small town tucked away in the mountains with water and crops and elk and deer and very low population density, not near any major cities, you're much more likely to bug in. But you still might have to bug out. Again, what if they have a wildfire? Or likewise in Manhattan, what if it's too late and all the roads are choked? One thing I'll say about my experience and knowledge of mass chaos, civil unrest, is things escalate quickly. It could be totally normal in the morning, people going to work, people drinking their coffee, and it can be utter chaos with people dying in the streets that evening. It happens that quick. It can definitely happen that quick. That being said, a lot of times your window for leaving is short. I would encourage you to have set things in your mind, like when we see these things happen, it's time to leave. Because what a lot of people will do is it's not that bad, it's not that bad, it's not that bad. And then before they acknowledge that it's bad, it's really bad. And they've lost their window of opportunity to get out. If you've ever lived in a big city, you heard that I was LAPD. I know how bad the traffic can be on a normal day during rush hour, when a very small portion of the population is going in one direction or another. Imagine then if almost everybody in that city is trying to go in one direction or two directions. If you don't get out first, you may not get out. Let me be clear about something else. I totally and completely trust in God's divine protection. He's gotten me through 2 combat tours in Iraq and some of the nastiest streets in LA. I've seen more men die on my side and on the other side than I care to recall and recollect. but God's got me through that, and I believe completely in God's divine protection. God is my shield, my high tower, my fortress. I believe in God's protection. I have faith in that. But that doesn't mean you don't have to leave. How many times in the Bible does God call his people to leave somewhere, to flee somewhere, to bug out? Well, just off the top of my head before recording this podcast, Abraham was called to leave the land of his fathers and go somewhere he'd never been and didn't know. Abraham, the patriarch, whom God chose to be the bearer of the seed of his people, he called him to bug out first. Joseph was called to leave the land he was from and go to Egypt, to bug out to Egypt. Why? Because he was called to get ready for a great famine. Likewise, Lot, he was called to bug out with his family. Why? Because the city he lived in was evil and full of disgusting and wicked sin. Are you seeing any parallels? Moses bugged out once by himself into the wilderness, and then God called him back to do perhaps the greatest bug out in history, the great Exodus. God called all his people to bug out, to leave, go where they were from. They had been for hundreds of years, to leave and go somewhere else. Likewise, David had to bug out. He had to flee. He had to flee an oppressive government and flee to the desert and to the wilderness. A man after God's own heart, a man whom God loved and protected. He still had to bug out. So those are not one or the other. For it is written, they declared plainly that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For if they had been mindful of the country from whence they came, they may have been permitted to return. But as it were, they sought a better country, a heavenly country. Hebrews 11. So which one's right for you? Bugging in or bugging out? That's on you. That's between you and your prayer with God and whatever circumstance you're in. Again, when society, cities descend into chaos, nations even, it can happen quickly. How long do you think it took us to sack or liberate Baghdad, whatever your point of view is? So things tend to snowball rather quickly. So make plans. Notice I didn't say have a plan. Make plans, plural. Your primary plan. Let's say for bugging out, your primary plan. If things get bad here, we're going to X. We're going to my cousin Jim's farm in Nebraska. If things get bad here in DC. And then have a backup plan. What if things get bad too quick and you can't get to Nebraska? Well, then me and my family are going to have to find the Potomac and walk out of DC. Get out of the built-up area. Get out of the city. Then have, after your primary and your alternate, have a contingency plan. I can't do either one of those, or both of those are bad options, so I'm going to follow the railroad tracks north. I'm just going to keep walking north on the railroad tracks until I get out of the chaos. Let me read you a correspondence I have with one of the patrons. Great guy. Say who he is, but he said I could share the information. He doesn't live there any longer, and what I shared back to him. This is a small part of what you get, what you can get if you choose to, if you join Patreon, to be part of a virtual community, a virtual tribe. Let's call him Patron X. It says, I used to work in a close-in suburb of Washington, D.C., and I lived in Woodbridge. After 9/11, I started to look at just how vulnerable D.C. region is. There are several bodies of water that make transportation difficult. For instance, the Occoquan River has only 4 bridges between the Potomac and Manassas. One of those bridges is a 2-lane road well to the west. Accessing that bridge would be a nightmare of twisty 2-lane roads that would get gridlocked within minutes of an emergency. The other 3 are within a few hundred yards of each other. That means the entire north-south corridor would be severely interrupted by cutting off those 3 bridges. That's an obvious national security issue, but it was also my individual issue because I worked on one side and lived on the other. Whether it was a terrorist attack or government quarantine, I needed to be able to evacuate that area. At the time, I had a truck with a toolbox. I carried a bug-out bag that was well thought out and set up specifically for an evac of my house where I would make other plans and arrangements. The problem was the river. I figured I'd be able to drive at least part of the way because the plan was to head west rather than south like everybody else. I knew that at some point I'd have to abandon the truck. I had the predictable stuff like boots, rain gear, fire starting stuff, water, so whatever kind of bars I don't know about, paracord, and the rest. There are 2 additional items that are not normal. I carried a set of bolt cutters and a plug to a rowboat. There is a state park on the north side of the Occoquan River. They rent boats. I had rented them before and had seen that they are all secured by a cable. When you remove one, they handed you the plug. They kept them unplugged so they didn't get stolen. My bug-out plan was to hike to the park, cut locks off the cable, and borrow a rowboat to get across the river. My home at the time was less than a mile from the landing on the south side of the river. I have since moved, and this plan is irrelevant to my current situation. But as I use the story as an illustration of planning and creativity, how many people would have a boat plug in their bug-out bag? It was critical to my plan, and without it, I would be stuck in place where I didn't have what I needed. Now that, gentlemen, that is a plan. That is a well thought out plan. That's not like, oh, well, I guess if something bad happens, I'll just leave. That's a plan. That's a well thought out plan. And here's my response. Wow, that was very well thought out and shows you had an actual plan, not just I'm bugging out. That's great. I had a similar thing in Las Vegas. If things got real bad, wouldn't be long there without water. Stored a bit, but plan was to get to Lake Mead and walk up the Colorado River, foraging along the way. The more remote areas like Arizona and Grand Canyon, coincidentally where I live now, even scouted it out on off-road trails and dry creek beds in the Hummer and mini bug-out bag hikes with my friend. Part of that reconnoitering was fording the river with impromptu flotation devices, probably a dry bag or industrial strength trash bag, a good piece of bug-out kit, fill it with air and swim it. Those are actual plans and things that I had actually gone and scouted out again and reconnoitered, did a recon on and done. That's an actual plan. It's not, oh, if things get bad, we'll just hop in the car, head on the freeway, and go out into the country. Now, plans may change. Again, I said have a primary, an alternate, and a contingency plan. But actual plans. Here's the good news. They don't generally cost anything. You can say, oh, I'm going to have a bug-out plan when I get a bug-out trailer and this and that, but you need to have a plan now. Again, I don't think you believe that the world is becoming a safer and more secure place. You're an alpha male. It's your responsibility not just to take care of yourself, but love your neighbor as yourself. That is the second greatest of the commandments. Love your neighbor as yourself. That notes that you love yourself and you value your own life. You don't belong to yourself. You were bought with a price. You were redeemed by the precious blood of Christ. You have value. You are important. You are worth saving. Love your neighbor as yourself. As an alpha male, you need to be ready to protect yourself, and save others, not just yourself. The widow and the orphan, the fatherless, the stranger. Be the good Samaritan. And to be that, be an alpha male and have a plan. I'll touch briefly on plans on bugging in. A lot of people will just default to bugging in because it's easier. Oh, all my stuff's here, so I just got to bug in. That's fine. I hope that you have stored water and food, whether you plan to bug in or out. You have stored food and water. But I got this from Viking Preparedness, one of the people I support on Patreon. But one of the things he says, and I might paraphrase it wrong, but he says something like, the second you crack into your stored food, you start the countdown to starvation. How are you going to resupply food? How are you going to make food? How long is your water going to last? Where and how do you get and make fresh water after that? One of the biggest killers in a lot of natural disasters is dirty water, dysentery. So have actual plans. You may have the coolest operator high-speed body armor and the coolest Daniel Defense AR, but you're not going to be too cool if you're doubled over in the fetal position dying of dysentery. Even in warfare, a lot of times sanitation kills more people than bullets does. So have actual plans. Actual bug-in plan is not, I got a plate carrier and an AR-15. I'm ready for the whomever. Have actual plans. Actual plans are not, oh, I've got a gun, I'm going to hunt for food. Have you ever actually hunted? Have you ever actually taken and shed the blood of an animal on the ground and butchered it and eaten it? If not, that's not a plan. I have somebody that I know and they're into preparedness. Recently decided they were going to go with their wife and go on a long road trip around the country. I said, that's great. What's your gun that you're going to take? Because we're gun guys. That's how I know him. And he's like, I'm going to take my Bren. You don't have to know what that is. Basically an assault rifle. And I said, what about getting food? And he said something like, oh, I'll just shoot whatever animal it is in the head. And I said, have you ever actually done that? And I knew the answer was no, because if he had actually tried that, he would know how infeasible that is. You're going to shoot the dove flying through the air with your 223 semi-automatic rifle in the head? Cool gun, great gun. I even think it's a good gun to have on a road trip. But if that's your one long gun, that's not really a plan. That's not really based on reality. Again, a plan is not, I got body armor and an AR-15, I'm good. A good plan, let's say for bugging in, just take water, a very important resource. I have, let's say, you're bugging in, you say my plan is I have 50 gallons of water. It's clean and in containers, ready to go. I throw some in a vehicle if I have to leave, but if I'm bugging in, I have that. I have a rain catchment system. The water that runs off the roof is going to get collected into 55-gallon barrels, and then I'm going to put that in my Berkey, and I'm going to drink it, and the stuff that I don't need to drink, I can just wash with. I know the average annual precipitation here, and in all but a really severe drought, I'll have enough water to get by. That's a plan for bugging in for water. And then your alternate plan for that is, if that doesn't work, if for some reason we don't get precipitation, then I know there's a creek 2 miles away, and it's going to suck, but I can hike there and get water, and at least my family and I will not die of dehydration. I would encourage you to make plans now with what you have. Just because we live here in America and can get pretty much anything we want on Amazon delivered in a couple of days does not mean that stuff solves every problem. You need planning. And plan with what you have, and then if you are blessed with better stuff, then adjust your plans accordingly. But plan with what you have now. What's your plan for bugging out if civil unrest happens where you are, or a wildfire happens where you are, and you have to bug out tomorrow? Do you have a plan? Start working on one if you don't. Another big thing, make sure the people you love and care about know the plan. What if things go bad and you guys aren't together or you get separated? If you're off at work and there's wildfire and the roads are closed, you literally can't get home. Family know, because communications are probably going to be down. Cell phone's probably not going to work in a big disaster. Family know where they're going. Do they know the primary bug out location? When that wildfire happened with my wife, she knew we had a bug out location. I said, we're going there. We're taking this route. We had 2 routes. I chose one and we went there. Like I said, this is an actual thing we actually did. We actually bugged out. Again, the important part of that is we had a plan. We had a location. It wasn't like, oh, we're just going to bug out. Like, we knew a place that we could go. Even here in Arizona that had water, that had food. Now, we had that stuff stored up, but if we had to live off the land, it was more than just a wildfire bug out location. It was our primary bug out location. But we had a plan and she knew it. She knew where to go. So have plans, make plans, and then make sure the people that you know and care about know those plans. And have alternate plans. Have contingency plans. Plans don't always go well. Plans are not just something you can order off Amazon. It's something you have to go back and do work on and plan and actually think about it. You can't just buy your way out of it. You have to make plans. You can't buy plans third party. Watch and be ready. How many times in the Bible does it say watch and be ready? Part of that being ready is having a plan. So have a plan. And having a plan doesn't mean being inflexible. Obviously, if situations change, and that plan needs to change. With that, we're going to wrap up the main topic. If you thought this episode was worth supporting, if you think this ministry of trying to make stronger, more resilient young men is something lacking in our society and you want to support it, if you think that you're called to do so. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com and go to Patreon. goodshepherdtraining.com and go to Patreon. With that, as a thank you for staying tuned till the end of the episode, the tactical tip of the day. We talked a lot about things getting bad and maybe having to leave. Part of that is packing a pack. If there's one thing an infantryman knows how to do, there's a lot of things infantrymen know how to do. But as a former infantryman, one thing that we know how to do is pack a pack. So if you don't know there's a right and a wrong way, maybe more than one right way to pack a pack, but there are certainly many wrong ways to pack a pack. So a couple of quick tips. In general, the heavy stuff closer to your body and on top. So let's say, for instance, you had some fairly bulky but not heavy winter clothes in your pack. You should probably go on the bottom and towards the outside of the pack, whereas your spare pair of boots might go on the inside, closer to the frame, closer to your body. It carries better that way. Maybe you want one spare mag or two spare mags on your belt, on the hip pockets of your pack. But in general, if you have heavy ammo or something that you're taking, you want that close to the frame and higher up. Exceptions would be if you need something right away. If you think you're going to need something quickly, obviously that should probably be easy to get to and on the top of your pack. I'm going to give another tactical tip of the day because I think it's important. Purifying water, as I said, drinking dirty water is a major killer in a disaster and a lot of natural disasters. My really good friends one time were having this discussion because things were getting pretty bad in the city where we were. And I said, what about clean water? And he's like, oh, I just boil water. And we lived in a city in the middle of the desert. And I was like, with what? Boiling water is a good option out in the forest where you have a bunch of wood and trees and dead sticks and whatever. But boiling massive amounts of water takes massive amounts of energy. That's like a full-time job, finding stuff. And what are you going to burn in the city to boil water? In an apartment and there's no water, there's no clean water, there's probably no gas or anything else. How are you going to boil that water? Again, that's not a plan. I'm going to boil water is not a plan. So a good way to get clean water is iodine. Look up the right ratio. I'm not a friggin' doctor, but iodine cleans water. Iodine kills bad stuff in water. Iodine is also not bad for you in the right quantities. In fact, it's good for you in the right quantities. You get the little tablets or a dry hockey puck looking thing of it. You get just the liquid. Look into it for yourself, but iodine is a less labor-intensive way to clean water. In fact, you can buy usually iodine tablets at Walmart for cleaning water in the camping section. Don't have those in your kit whether you're bugging in or bugging out. I'd say that's probably one of the quintessential things you should have. Berkeys are good, Life Straws are good. Iodine is light and not expensive and can purify a lot of water. So you get 2 tactical tips of the day. And if you thought any of those were worth anything, the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo, or probably the next thing you're going to buy on Amazon, consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and going to Patreon. With that, men, I'm going to read to you Revelation 18. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. Coming out of Babylon. I believe that's primarily a spiritual coming out. Not coveting the sin and decadence of Babylon. Come out. Be separate. Be set apart. Again, I believe that is primarily come out. Your heart, come out in your mind. Be separate from Babylon. But I believe, as we talked about earlier, it can be very literal. Lot had to bug out of Sodom and Gomorrah. His wife was reluctant, and she didn't make it. Let me read you some more. You'll find this in chapter 6 of Revelation. I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given to him. And he went out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the second seal, I heard a second living creature saying, come and see. Another horse, fiery red, went out. And it was granted to the other who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another. And there was given to him a great sword. And when he opened the third seal, I heard a third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on him had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." When he opened the fourth seal, I heard a voice of 4 living creatures saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. You think inflation is bad now, a quart of wheat for a denarius. So you know how big a quart is, but a denarius, from what I understand, was considered an entire day's wages. So I would urge you, after reading that, to be circumspect, watch and be ready, and have a plan. Have a bug-in plan, a bug-out plan, a fallback plan, and a contingency plan. You likely need those more than you need the next shiny thing from Babylon on Amazon. I'm not telling you to not enjoy good blessings that you've been given and blessed with. He gives us all things richly to enjoy. I may enjoy those things, but God is my joy and my peace. I hope to never love anything like I love my God. With that, men, thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.